Joined today by Atul Punj, the chairman of Punj Loyd, whose logos are all over Delhi and a sign of how successful they are in the construction business. Swati Ramanathan, the co-founder of Janaagraha, a non-profit that specializes in boosting participation, citizen participation with local government. And Arun, a member of the Planning Commission, an institution that needs no introduction from me. We're talking about fighting potholes and improving infrastructure in India. Anybody who lives here knows that this is an enormous problem, one that does get frequently discussed at conferences like this. So we're going to try and focus on a few aspects of it that we hope will be constructive and interesting, even though we were talking about this beforehand, even though potholes is a term very redolent for the decrepit state of Indian roads. We're actually going to take potholes very broadly and look at the obstacles to a much broader range of infrastructure that also would include the soft infrastructure of India, not just building the roads and the airports, but also building the capabilities and the quality of the people involved. So thank you very much for joining us. The layout for the panel will be, we'll have maybe 3 or 4 minute comment from each of the panelists based on a question from me. And then we will have a panel discussion amongst ourselves for maybe 20 minutes. And then we will very gladly take as many questions from you as we can fit in. So please start thinking of them now. The only rule for questions is really that they be brief, that they be a question, and that they, ideally, you can direct them at any member of the panel, or you can lob it at the panel and we'll decide who's going to answer them. So even though we're starting a little bit late, we're going to stop dead on at 6, and so without any further ado, we will get started. Atul, I wanted to ask you, you've had a lot of experience in this industry. Just to set context for this, given India's capabilities, given India's economic growth, given its population, why is infrastructure in this country a disaster?
Well, I think the reasons for this really go back to the time when we really adopted the socialist model. And there was a lot of emphasis on really looking to, in the implementation of infrastructure projects, break them up into the smallest possible pieces. And you tended to have a set of cottage industry equivalent of construction companies that really started participating in this. And then the obsession of the government organizations to award contracts to the lowest bidder without having any relevance to an economic price. So when you have projects being let out at, let's say, at times 20% below the direct material cost of a project, you're bound to have a substandard quality infrastructure that's going to be built up, whether it's on the quality of cement, the size of the rebar, et cetera, et cetera. So that really was the chain that started, and it's now become almost part of our culture in terms of project implementation. We're now seeing a change happening, especially in the highway side, where the companies that are playing a part are getting larger, but we're running a risk at the same time of a lot of them picking up work for the sake of, for the wrong reasons, valuation, IPOs, et cetera, et cetera. And that is, I think, the biggest danger that we face today, where you see the gap between the low bidder and next bidder being so vast, people can't help but ask each other as to how will they possibly implement these projects at those prices. So what started out as being a cottage industry type of problem is now likely to become a big industry problem as well. And a lot of it is to do with the attitude of the Indian. I mean, the Indians, I believe, we suffer from what I call a herd mentality. As an example, I say that 15 years ago, it was fashionable for every business house to have a stockbroking division in their companies. That morphed into becoming an NBFC. That morphed into becoming a software company. That then morphed into becoming a real estate company. And today, those are morphing into becoming infrastructure companies. So, you know, the lack of actual depth of competence, capability, and a knowledge about what really is required on the ground level is, I think, going to be a problem going forward.
Terrific, thank you. Swati, in terms of priorities, you mentioned before that, in your view, too much infrastructure priority has been given to national projects. Where do you think it needs to be focused, and what needs to be done on that front?
Well, it's it's not so much that too much priority has been given as that not enough has been given to the urban infrastructure. That we've completely neglected what the problems of urban infrastructure and the requirements. You're not able to hear?
Maybe not hearing.
This is on. It's on, right?
Just tap it.
Is this better?
No.
No, take another one.
So it's more that not enough attention has been paid to urban infrastructure. And if you look at the size of it, our guess is that it's the same requirement. If you look at all the aggregated requirements of urban India, of cities in urban India, I would hazard a guess that it's equal to what we want in power and ports and all of the national infrastructure that we are investing in. And I think that no real study has been done on what are the needs of the core services and expenditure requirements of urban infrastructure. The fact that there is now a high-powered expert committee, which is headed by Ishara Luwalia, is beginning to do that estimate, to say what exactly do we need for our cities to provide the basic kind of services and infrastructure that we all deserve. I did the part on roads, interestingly enough, and it's quite serendipitous that I was on this panel, but the cost of roads, if we had to do it the way it should be, not going extravagant, but we did a complete costing on tier 1, tier 1A, tier 1B, tier 1C cities. Based on population, you have tiers, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and on 4 categories. One was on the roads itself, the road network itself within cities. The second one was on overbridges. The third one was on public transportation wherever you had tier 1 and tier 2, tier 1 cities. And the fourth one was on traffic management cells. The key ones to make sure that the connectivity and functioning of our cities are adequately met. It comes out to 50,000 as an average, rupees 50,000 per capita. If you look at expected growth, I'm not even talking about the backlog requirements, but the expected growth that we are seeing, 300 million urban residents to come into our cities over the next, say, 4 decades by 2050. That's a whopping 15 lakh crores requirement that we have. So I think that there is a very large requirement, and I don't think that we're factoring that in at all. And the size, the reason these numbers are very important is so that people like, Punj Loyd come in and see the size of it to say, wow, this is a business, there's a real potential here. But in order for that to happen, some of what Atul was already mentioning, which is our procurement processes which are completely broken, the aggregation, the benefits of scale, both from industry. Industry is also fairly fragmented, it's not organized. And government is, of course, not at all reaching out, making the procurement processes easy, making sure that not just the lowest bidder, but the best bidder also wins. So these are all some of the procedural changes that are required for us to meet these kinds of demands. And finally, the roads, if I can just close with that. Unlike the highways and what we're talking about outside our cities, inside our cities it's become a real problem. If you look, closely, go ahead and any neighborhood where you're seeing some major rework done on your road, just take a look at it. It's not just what's on the road, what's above. It's not your footpath, your lights, your blacktop, your tar. It's what's beneath. We've got such old infrastructure. Water supply pipes, sewage systems, they cross, they're broken, they're leaking. You've got electrical lines, high electricity tension lines there. You've got telecom, stormwater drains, side drains. All of this is it's a maze under the road. So it's not just enough to look at it in a superficial skin layer of the road. We have to revamp everything which goes inside it. So to that extent, it's quite a complex process.
Thank you. Arun, it's your agency's job to get us out of this.
Get you out of the pothole.
What are you going to do about it?
I'd like to take off from the last thing that Swati said, that it's not what's on the surface, it's what's beneath that really matters. And if you start by saying there are potholes on the road, and you ask yourself the question, why are there potholes on the road, you will come to say that maybe the road wasn't well designed, or it wasn't well constructed, or then it wasn't well maintained, things that Atul is pointing out too. And you must ask yourself, but why is it that? that it's not well designed, it's not well executed, it's not well maintained. And you come down to the capabilities, as he's pointing out, of institutions, of people. And this is true not just of the big infrastructure outside cities, but very much so also about the infrastructure inside cities, that Swati points out too. And the infrastructure inside cities is not just the roads that matter, in which there are potholes, but there are potholes in the water systems. Metaphorically, the water doesn't come, it's bad, it's dirty. The potholes in the sewage systems, there are potholes in all urban services. So we do need to have the ability to address the why these potholes exist in a variety of systems. And all of it comes down to what you said at the beginning, the soft infrastructure. Actually, beneath the hard top, there's the soil beneath the soft one, which is where, if it's not right, you will keep getting potholes. And I think we have got to get clear that it's the building of the capabilities of institutions of different sites, and I want to be very specific about those capabilities and institutions, that will enable us not to have this problem in the cities and between cities. We say that. Those capabilities, yes, they're engineering capabilities in the town, they're urban planners' capabilities, urban water system maintenance people's capabilities. As Swati pointed out, that the demand in this country for such services is going to be so huge. I'm going to hazard a guess, starting with the capital side, that, as you said, Asian Committee are estimating, but the early numbers coming out say that something like 3 lakh crore a year for just the hard side of the urban infrastructure. 3 lakh crore a year. It's a huge market, yes? Yeah, huge market. But to design that, to implement that, to maintain that, imagine the amount of institutional capability that one is going to need. Where is this? So we must first build the soil, start at least building the capabilities so that this capital gets attracted, gets well spent, and we will have then roads that and infrastructure that doesn't have potholes thereafter. So the agenda that the government is now thinking about in the Ministry for Urban Affairs is an agenda to very systematically quickly build the soft infrastructure that we need so that we have good hard infrastructure as quickly as we can get it. And the appeal to, not appeal to the World Bank themselves are thinking of the same, that as they look at the experience in India and the experience elsewhere, if you don't get the soft infrastructure right, you can keep building the hard infrastructure and you'll keep getting potholes into it. There's one soft infrastructure which you alluded to, but I want to emphasize that. You know, when we think about our cities, since you mentioned it, and people say, look, our cities are so bad. If my foreign guest comes at the airport, it takes him so long to get down into the hotel downtown, especially in Bombay. That's bad infrastructure, right? But we worry then that they might see the slums in which people are living, and what about the infrastructure inside the slums? So what's the concept of the city, and how do we bring it together? Which I think you were suggesting, that it's the stakeholders involved who need to be much more connected, that the infrastructure is going to benefit them. Whatever they have to sacrifice to allow the infrastructure to come is going to be in some ways, in some other ways of benefit to them. And the same problem applies in the infrastructure of the roads between our cities. The acquisition of land and permissions from the people to do that is really where we are stuck. In addition to the hard capabilities that we mentioned earlier. So the agenda has to be on these soft capabilities. I mentioned the 4 types that we wish to have. And I want to acknowledge, you might speak about it, Swati's organization is really helping stakeholders to come together, to determine the form of infrastructure that they want to have and what they will do about it, to maintain it or to pay for it and so on.
You mentioned land. I mean, it's a debate that we often hear. China's way ahead on infrastructure because if there's an apartment building that houses 100,000 people, they bulldoze it overnight and build a highway through it, right? And the people never get a chance to see it. And here, you have to go to every single farmer and negotiate for a small plot of land. But I quite often feel that is unfair to democracy. I mean, democracies all over the world have built phenomenal infrastructure, and maybe not as densely populated as India's, but I really wonder if democracy is the issue, or if bureaucracy is the issue, or if past history is the issue. What is it that prevents that land acquisition process from being able to, clear the way for big infrastructure?
May I just come in there? I lived in Lexington outside Boston. It has a dangerous airport, Boston and Logan. It's really inadequate for what it needs to go. It's unsafe also at times. So Boston has been trying for the last 20 years to have another airport in Bedford. And I lived in Lexington, and the path was over. I'm not talking about land now, but the rich residents of Lexington stalled in every possible way, and I think they still have after these years, to allow planes to fly over so that that airport could be used. So that infrastructure which that city needs in a democracy is quite difficult to get, even in the United States. So I do take your point that we have to make our democratic processes work more efficiently. And this is where I come to what Swati was saying. I think what I wanted her to talk about is that we need to have debate and discussion and consensus, but can we not make it happen more effectively? What are the processes to do that? Just don't leave it to happen. It will not happen effectively. You must have a process to do that.
Atul, you wanted to, I mean, you must have very first-hand experience with this one.
No, I think very often too much is made of this, the fact that we're a democracy. I mean, look at two significant projects that are under implementation in New Delhi itself right now. They've happened in record time. They've happened without people worrying about the soft skills because they've got them from wherever they need to on a global level. They've got some great quality work going on, barring a couple of incidents that have happened. You have the Delhi Metro and you have the Delhi International Airport. They're both world-class implementation in terms of speed, quality, and also in terms of operation now. So I don't think we need to wait for one side to come into place before the second side steps in. I think what's critical is at the implementation stage that the country's citizens get what they are paying their taxes for. And to me, I mean, I have only 20% of my work is in India. The rest of it is outside in different parts of the world. The sadness is that it's so obvious when you have total up the concrete, rebar, sand that goes into a piece of concrete. It comes to, let's say, for ease of argument, 100. You have contractors, and forget about labor, and forget about equipment, and forget about overhead, and forget about profit. You have contractors bidding 80 against 100 of the direct material cost alone. You know that you're not going to get a proper quality job. You know the guy's going to compromise. Instead of a 12 rebar, he's going to put a 6. Okay, and when you question these people as to why they do that, they say, well, Delhi is a high seismic zone. The structural engineers multiply a factor of 3. So instead of 12, we can actually get away with 4, but we're putting in 6, so it's okay. So it's that attitude at the implementation level that is the cancer in our urban infrastructure. Like I was saying earlier, you walk into an Infosys, a TCS campus, they're world class. They're built in India, designed by Indians, you know, being used and maintained by Indians, right? You could be in another world. You look at Singapore's largest construction workforce is from India. You look at the Middle East, it's all being built by Indians. You know, so the competency is there on the soft side. It's the attitude of the owner and the agencies that they used for the actual inspection and supervision of the work that the contractor is carrying out. There is a reasonableness about the pricing that contractors get. Any other part of the world, if we quote a price which is considered unreasonable, we're not even considered. An ExxonMobil, Total, ENI, government of Qatar will just take us off a list. But in India, you can have a gap which is 20%, and you know, it's too bad, because everybody's worried about the tyranny of the three-letter word. People refer to it as CAG, somebody else says CBI, but the fact is, everybody's looking for an excuse, all right, not to do what the country needs. Now, there have been few stalwarts in the past that ran public sectors who didn't care. They did what was right, and you've ended up with some great national assets as a result of the attitude these few men had. But 90% of the people driving these organizations are just always running scared about. The answer given to me is, "Sab, wo hame kabar se khod ke nikal ke le aayenge sawal jawab karne ke liye." So we're going to follow the book. We don't care if the guy has quoted 50% of what it should be a price. We're going ahead with it. We don't care. The other guy can come in and take care of it. That is the cancer that's eating it up. Well,
we did a story earlier this week about the new solar power plant that has come up in Punjab. It's run by Azure Power, and that I think is producing, if I'm correct, 2 megawatts of electricity. The government wants 20,000 megawatts of electricity from solar energy. To get that plant operational required 152 permits. What can the government do about that, and what possible incentive is there really for private enterprise to get into these businesses in a big way?
I mean, at one level, I really empathize with this, and I'll address what Arun was also, referring to that I should speak about. But I think you're absolutely right. I admire entrepreneurs in India. I mean, I think if you have to work, especially if you have to interact with public sector, frankly speaking, it is a nightmare. I mean, we are looking at, my husband is trying to build affordable housing for the poor. It's, there is not a rupee that we take out of it. It is entirely for a social cause. And it has taken 4 years and endless permits and endless, rent seeking to do something like this. I can completely empathize what it must be like to be an entrepreneur in India. It's not easy. So, I do want to say that. Having said that, I think that the processes need cleanup. And I think that the onus must lie also on industry to take that leadership, to come out and voice and, create the advocacy that is required for this kind of a cleanup. I think there must be fairness, there must be transparency, there must be accountability at that level. And once you have those three rolled in, it becomes very easy, because you've left your trail, you've left a trail that keeps you safe. And I think that's a very important one. But I think that not enough attention is paid to that from industry. In terms of the local areas, I think participation is important, and people, the processes that, again, as a check and balance, to make sure that the right kinds of works that are taken place and the right kinds of infrastructure is provided. I think participatory processes are very, very important at the local level. So, to just quickly talk about the land part that you referred to, I think there are two real issues on land and acquisition in India. One is that we don't have a title to land. So it's all a sale deed. When you go off as a private sector to say that let me go and buy the land for this kind of purpose that I need, you have no clue. The kinds of checks and balances that you have to do to make sure that you're buying what you're giving for good money, but what you're getting, is it really that person's land to sell or not? You have no idea. The second is the size of the holdings. They have fragmented because of all our reforms and that we went through, the country went through. The size of the land holdings, because it was given away to those who were tilling the land, was fragmented to such a large extent that you have to deal with multiple players in order to get an aggregate piece of land. So you'd start and you'd get 5 people to sell to you, and then the others would hold out. Because people are smart at the end of the day, and they become price takers in this whole proposition. So then they wait out, they really negotiate, and it just becomes a very, very uncomfortable. Entire process takes forever and costs you far more than you could probably afford to begin with.
Can I ask Atul a question? Because I think you hit the nail on the head to say that there is corruption, and let me use the big word, corruption in the...
Not necessarily financial, but in terms of attitude.
Attitude, quite right. It starts with attitude too. You don't
want
to pay attention to detail, and some people are. It's also financial. It's side by side to do that. Let me say, the construction business, okay? And maybe it's everywhere in the world, but it's pretty bad in India. It's pretty bad, right? So you come to dealing with well-known, and you said there should be, big business in construction, and there is actually big business in construction, and then there are people who, and because we receive the complaints, now that consumers have a voice, they are dealing directly with these construction companies, building companies. It's not government. And they feel that they are not getting a fair deal. The quality of what is put is not okay. The promises are not met. And you know where you can go to appeal against that, okay? So it's not just government, okay? And so here it's the construction, it's business. People feel we can't trust business and we can't trust government. So it's pretty bad in urban areas particularly.
Arun, I think you're combining two different activities. What you're referring to is the attitude of developers, not necessarily construction companies. Mm-hmm. Okay, very often it is not necessarily a developer who's also the contractor. He engages the contractor, a construction company, who will then build to a spec that he finds acceptable at a price point in which the developer feels that he can maximize his profit. Okay, so it's not really a malaise that's so much with the construction community. It's more to do with the development mindset. Now, we are not developers, we are construction.
No, I wasn't pinning on you.
No,
the government is the developer, they give to construction people. These private developers are developers, they give to construction people. And you ask some of the people in construction, people like yourself, and they say that person actually wants me to cut the corners. When you say 10 to 6, you say, you know, I'm getting the pressure to say you don't have to do this, I will not pay the bill, from the developer to the builder.
But that is really up to the construction company to turn around and take a view as to with what quality of project does he want his name attached. We, for example, refuse to take work where we feel that our reputation will get sullied. It's a reputation which we built with a lot of effort, all right? And it takes one bad project, okay, for somebody to turn around and tarnish your image. So as a rule, we step back. And how did we afford to step back? I took the other option. I went overseas. Okay, to protect my reputation, I took the more difficult course. I traveled to the Middle East, North Africa, Southeast Asia, Central Asia. People thought I was crazy. But at least I don't need to worry about any of these issues, okay? I have to report my safety statistics, for example, on a global level. When I go into a Shell or an ExxonMobil, I can't turn around and say, look, but our India practice, you know, life is cheap in India, so our LTI rates are much higher, or fatality rates are that much higher in India, so disregard that. I can't. I have to report on a global level. So I've created a pressure on our organization that keeps us best in class. Okay? Most people feel very comfortable because there is so much work in the country. We're talking about how many lakhs of hundreds of crores are going to be spent here, right? I would still not bring 100% of my practice back to India. I would still try to keep it 30-35%, up from 20 where it is today, right? Because it is important for me to protect my reputation. Now, unless people start recognizing and paying a premium for a building built by a company of repute, where they know when they get in there it's going to last for 50 years. They don't need to worry about the pipes corroding. They don't need to worry about the toilet starting to leak. They don't need to worry about seepage coming through every possible rainwater pipe, right? That premium will start reflecting the attitude on the attitude of developers and construction companies.
Can I, Atul, I too have a question, which is, in a democracy, at the end of the day, the pressure for change will not come from within government. The pressure for change will come from outside of government. Do you not see a role for entrepreneurs like you in your industry to create that pressure for change?
No, I'm creating that pressure, which is why I'm sitting here on this panel. Because I feel strongly that it is examples like what we have done, which are important for others to start emulating, to start raising the standards in the country. You know, it's only then that you will start having people adopt a different mindset.
How do you encourage that, though? I mean, how do you encourage good behavior, in effect?
At the end of the day, it all comes down, frankly, in our business to pricing. A well-priced contract will always get executed at the best possible speed, at the best possible quality, all right? And you will always remember a particular project like that. A poorly priced, which is where the whole L1 obsession comes in, all right? And I've been urging authorities in the government to say that please work out a minimum walkaway price as an owner. That if anybody quotes below this number, you know that he has no way that he can execute it unless he's compromising on material, on equipment, on quality of people, the kind of soft skills that are required to execute a job in terms of the planning of it, etc. Unless you start putting a walkaway price, every dollar that you spend, every rupee that you spend is really going down the toilet, and every day somebody's getting up and pulling the flush. So you need to have the government turn around and say, we know this is happening. You walk outside your door, you will see the poor quality of infrastructure that we have got as a nation over 60 years, right? And you look at the infrastructure that was given to us when we were under the British rule.
Arun,
a lot of that is still surviving absolutely perfectly.
Arun, do you agree that the government, I mean, do you think the Planning Commission would ever be in a position to recommend that the government get away from this obsession with lowest price?
Someone saying I should say yes, I should say yes. I will say yes, okay? I will say yes. I also want to be very sure that when we specify what we want, we are very clear about what we want. For that, we want the lowest price. So it's in specifying what you want and the capability of the person to deliver what you want. If you qualify technically with regard to these matters, thereafter, the lowest price. That is fair, okay? So it's in our ability to specify these two things. One is what you want, and be sure you get that. And the second is the capability of the person, that's the soft side, as I say, that I want to first pre-qualify that before I allow you to bid. Now we are going into the infrastructure, as you say, the big infrastructure between roads, and we recognized that we need to get the big players, bigger players, into, you've been probably invited too, and into these big projects. And there it's coming to people saying that some of these bigger players, not you, would be well respected. Yes, because they have done similar things and they could put together and organize. We're saying is that's the demand side. There are people who are working in the ground. If they're demanded to do the right thing and they know the atmosphere is such that they'll be respected for doing the right thing, they will do it. So you want the developer, if you want to call it that, for the big infrastructure to be such an organization that they will not compromise any standard and to do that. Now when you invite these in, they may not have done specifically roads, for example, or ports. No. So how do you pre-qualify them? So we're going through that. We are discovering how do you specify these things in such a way that you will get both fairness to everybody and the good quality at the end of it. Then thereafter, yes, you should ask for the lowest price. Everybody does in business once you're getting the right thing that's comparable apple to apple that you're going to get.
One of the things that we did was, you see, the problem also is that there is simply no data on. There's so little information on what are the kinds of tenders that are put out. There's not enough time to see where is in the government pipeline, you know, the timing of it, where are they in that bidding so that an entrepreneur can actually plan their own finances. There's no information on aggregation, what's the total quantity, which sectors, where is it that contractors are applying, which cities don't have contractors. All of this is stuff that there's no information on. So we actually did a study, 4.5 months. We looked at 20 cities in India urban space 3 months ago. We took all of the contracts, all the tenders that came out in these cities. And it was staggering the kind of information that we found. First of all, we found in 4.5 months, and this was excluding Gujarat, which is doing a lot of infrastructure, and some of the western cities of the western states. In spite of that, you could make some pretty good analysis. There was $1.3 billion worth of bids, and the percentage of bids that actually don't come through is only 1%. So you can pretty much imagine that $1.3 billion would come through. That's 9 million a day. And we found exactly what you were saying, Arun, which is there was only 11% which was over 2 million in terms of the total contract, which is the one where the international players, the EPC players will come in. So it completely excluded all of these because the rest of it were all fragmented little things. And interestingly enough, Paul, 29% of that was for roads. 29% of the total numbers as well as the financial allocation of it was on roads. And this is not even subsidized by the JNNURM funds, you know, the big urban thing that was there. So
let me just ask you another question, Swati, while we're there. We tend to portray the Indian electorate as being as being an obstacle to some degree to this in terms of land acquisition and agitation or whatever. But there was, you know, this.
Did you say electorate or politician?
No, the electorate. I mean, in terms of giving up the land and land acquisition being a big problem. But the flip side of that is that you do see in states like Bihar where there is tangible economic development, there's a political reward, or at least that becomes a vote-winning strategy. And to what degree can the citizenry be a positive force for pushing better infrastructure in this country? Because they just all too often get portrayed as sort of, you know, you can't get them out of the way when you want to build a road. But how can that be turned around to actually give the movement some momentum?
If I may just lead into that for just 1 minute.
Yeah.
Firstly, I disagree with you that the electorate is the bottleneck. It's not the bottleneck. The bottlenecks are interest groups that have an interest in making it into an issue. Mm-hmm. For example, we've had some of our land acquisition delayed in Assam because there was some stone quarrying work happening in that area. So it was inconvenient, okay, and those quarries happened to be in the control of some of the local politicos. Mm-hmm. So it was inconvenient for them to allow us to build the road. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it was not really the villager wanted it, or the small town dweller wanted it, but it was inconvenient to certain interest groups, mm-hmm. clearly. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I don't believe that the electorate for a moment does not want proper infrastructure. They desperately want it.
Why then, so for instance in Mumbai, do so few of the middle class vote? I mean, if there was a big middle class vote that could push the infrastructure question, then would that not make a difference?
Well, I think in Bombay they've had tons of programs led by all the top citizens of the city and how they're going to spend $10 billion to make
That's
it
the
work
problem.
for the city.
That's the problem. That's the problem in the Bombay situation, that everybody needs infrastructure, but different types of infrastructure. So when the top people come in, and the infrastructure they seem to want is the one I was describing, that, you know, get the people off the road so my car can drive very fast down the road, and that will make it a world-class city. The people resist that, because that's not what they want. In fact, it disrupts their lives. They want infrastructure, but who's hearing them? So they gather then and carry placards and stuff, and we say they're obstructions. The electorate, as you say, they're obstructions to the infrastructure.
And where actually the participation comes in. Because
Yes.
I think that part of the problem is, you know, besides the transparency in how the decision-making came about, it's also not having any voice in that decision-making process. And it is messy because we are in a democracy, and as Arun says, there are conflicting claims of different stakeholders in a democracy. So how do you address that? So the process will, by nature, be messy, and you can't get away from that. But I think it is important that there must be a voice in the decision-making process. But it's important, therefore, that that process is not chaotic. It doesn't actually stop it, so that you'll never get anywhere. 20 years down the road, you're still stuck in status quo, and that's not very healthy either. So I think that that process, definition of that process is something that must be clear, that must be articulated, that must be put forth, debated, and then taken forward.
Well, if I may just add on the Bombay issue, you know, this on the surface transport side, it's really the easiest city in the country to solve their problem. But you don't take 8 years to build one small sea link and then talk about it for the next 8 months. But in 8 years' time, they should have just encircled the whole island, all right, with the same elevated causeway and have roads feeding into it. You've decongested the city overnight without disrupting anyone.
This is again part of the tendering issue, right? Because the costs escalated and the tender had to be revisited. And I mean, I know because Ajit Gulabchand, who built that bridge, was telling me about. Yes, he was giving me the whole gory story.
But
and
the other parts, the other sections could have been tendered. The other sections could have moved along. Maybe we would have had a debate, and again comes down to the pricing story. Okay, and when you have this obsessively low pricing, you have excessive litigation. I mean, if you look at the amount of litigation that the National Highway Authority alone is dealing with, is worth 10,000 crores. 10,000 crores. And we're just starting out on what we claim to be a very ambitious plan. And it is a very ambitious plan. It will be achieved. But if that 10,000 crores of litigation is going to multiply tenfold again, all right, because you've not changed your norms, all right, I mean, I'd love to be a lawyer.
Arun, when you, if you at the Planning Commission are looking out on these topics and you're looking out for models around the world that are realistic, right? I mean, India's not going to be a Singapore of 1.2 billion people or whatever. But when you're looking around, what is a good expectation or a good model that is out there that says, you know, here's another democracy of a good size that went from here to here over the course of 10 years. And if we could make a similar leap in India, then that, you know, we could say that, that was a job well done and that was a good performance. Are there any other role models out there?
Yes. Let's look at countries which had similar conditions as ours, with a lot of poverty, already got slums in it, so there are people who got interest without title, etc. So it's difficult to move them politically. So South America has several such, in Mexico, some in Southeast Asia, but those are the two places. And South America, Bogota, and others in South America, but they are really interesting cities because they have improved themselves over 10 years, and now people are from the USA also coming and saying, this is how you should be developing a city. And when you look at the stories of those cities, they're not stories what engineers did. They're stories about what local activists and the local mayor and the local politicians along with the people together did. They sorted out the conflicting interests. They said, okay, this will be done first, which will not hurt anybody, it's a small thing, then the next, and the thing gets transformed. It's an evolutionary process. It's not an engineering top-down, blast what's there and put something new sort of process at all. So that's what we are learning.
It's not the Chinese model.
It's not, can't be, you see, because they also have a political power system.
Bogota you were talking about?
Yes,
in
Bogota,
particular.
yes. Okay. And they come to, in India itself, I would say, I mean, I've recently started looking more actively in the Planning Commission at urbanization. Previously it was as a very interested citizen going that. And I find that actually there's change happening in our cities. And you know, it's always so that the change in our perceptions changes later than the change in the reality. And I think about our cities that nothing can be done or nothing is being done is quite wrong. The last 3 days we had officers from cities, 30, 40 cities across the country, and state people responsible for urbanization in their states. By the way, to have a state officer responsible for urbanization, this was not true 3 or 4 years ago. We never thought we'd have a rural development officer, not an urbanization, but there are. So we are applying ourselves, and we had these people from these cities talking. What were they talking about? They had been given benchmarks, a system of benchmarks and benchmarks by the World Bank and DFID from cities across the world, like you're saying, and for themselves. And they had rated themselves in terms of water, sanitation, and sewage, and toilets, to see how good or bad they are, and they admitted some that we are 15 on a scale of 100 and 30 and so on, rated themselves. Then they talked amongst each other about, so what are you doing about it? What have we done about it? And at the end of it, to hear after 2 days, these city people, they are government officers and others, proudly saying that I learned something. Not saying I've achieved something, but I've learned something. I mean, I say therefore something is happening. That's the soft infrastructure I'm talking about. So I have hope that if we were to nurture and support these processes, we will, in a few years, see a pretty different situation in many cities.
You know, if I can just add to that thing, Arun, one of the most significant contributions that you could make from where you're sitting, a large part of the problem that we have is that the people that are implementing or the people that will be the users know no better. The villager, his benchmark is the dirt road. The dirt road got compacted a bit and he could drive a bit more comfortably. Then somebody came and put a black top on top of it. Now for him it doesn't really matter whether the black top stayed or not, because his memories of the dirt road are still very fresh, right? Similarly, when you look at the urban side, you look at the average inspector, the supervisor of NDMC, of MCD, of DDA, he knows no better. Right?
That's why I said, you know,
so
their training, yes.
If we could somehow, now I'm not talking about overseas junkets and all that,
Yeah.
we should identify within India which are the urban centers of excellence, which could be the software parks, it could be the BPO centers, it could be TISCO in Jamshedpur, it could be any of the other large urban centers that have been built that run as communities, and make these people visit those locations.
It won't do enough, Atul, if I might say. You see, that is the end objective that you want to get to. You dream and you want to have it, but the process of getting there is what you have to learn. And that is what I think we are applying ourselves to say, yeah, I can show you the end. And then you keep complaining about, but you know, I have democracy and stuff. Let's learn how with this democracy, with, at the moment, half-trained people who will be trained side by side simultaneously, we can get from here to there. So the benchmarking about the process of change, the tools for the process of change is what we need right off. Otherwise, there'll be potholes.
And also, I just want to say, it's not just about showing them, you know, it's not just about showing them the possibility. The reality is that they don't have the skills, they don't have the tools, they don't have the manpower, they don't have any of the things that enable them to execute the way you would want to. PPP itself is such a new thing. I mean, you're suddenly asking an engineer, the role of the engineer is changing slowly to become a program manager. Or an, you know, so it's very difficult, and he or she doesn't have the skills, he invariably, so he doesn't have the skills. They don't even know how to keep the private sector honest. So there's a huge dependency, and then of course there's rent seeking and all of that as well, because, you know, that's the nature of their salaries and their pay structures. An engineer today, the reality is, if I'm hired into government, I have no path, as in private sector, I have no career path to look forward to. I will retire in the same position as I joined. And that's pretty sad. There's no investment in skills training, there's nothing. These are the fundamental things.
There's a lot more happening with skills training than I mean, we, for example, have now 6 centers on a national level where we train. Okay, because we need to have technicians, operators, carpenters, bar benders, mechanics that will feed into our operations. The problem happens in India that when you have a large-scale development happening somewhere else in the world, Indian workers are preferred. So the cream of what's happening out in, being trained or being developed out in India, whether it's doctors, whether it's nurses, whether it's construction workers, whether it's engineers.
Atul Punj also, who's not giving his time to us in India.
And you know, so you will find that there'll be a large group of very highly skilled people that will leave India. And that happens because the companies in India, again back to the same pricing issue, cannot afford to pay them what they feel that is actually their worth. but a Singapore contractor can, or even at times a Nepalese contractor will.
But I come back to that. The change, the pressure for change will not come from within the system. So where is it going to come from then?
That's a
Why
$1 trillion
is it that
question.
you are not putting,
Arun wants to
why
answer
are
that
you
question.
knocking on his doors every day and saying, who are all the players that we should go to? We need to we need a serious advocacy effort to change this.
I'll tell you, Atul was saying this. He mentioned pride in what you do, that you will not compromise that. I want to do the good thing, and I will not compromise that, okay? We need to build pride in the work that people do, and people to start taking pride in how they're changing their place to begin with. The confidence to see how much ground we've covered in a year, and by gum, in 3 years, you just wait and see what this will be.
But Arun,
And the pride to start, rather than shaming ourselves all the time, let's find places where there can be the building of the pride, because pride is where leadership comes.
Where do you take them? Where do you, if someone comes to you and says, show me what India can do for infrastructure, show me how good it can be. I think Atul would take them to Singapore.
No, I
Where
would tell you
take
how good it can be, because we are not
I
there
take
probably anywhere except Infosys campus.
I
But
take
that's
him
not
to
a good
Delhi,
example.
I take him to Delhi International Airport. I take him to Hyderabad International Airport. Surely. I mean, it's possible to do. But the point that I was coming back to is, you have palaces being built in terms of, institutions. Not only personal homes, but hotels, offices, which are getting more and more lavish as you go along. And it shocks me when I look outside and I see that all the workers working on those projects are living in plastic tented, sheeted accommodation on the empty plot next door.
They're not given toilets to use when they come to work.
Now, when we house our people, all right, it became news on the Belgaum Maharashtra road. We built a camp, we had porta cabins, we had a gym in there, we had a mess in there. It actually was newsworthy. Any other part of the world, it's par for the course. Okay?
Safety gear for your construction.
Yeah, exactly. So the point again is the attitude that the contractors also need to develop. If 5 people turn around and say that I have this price because I keep my workers like this, I bust them in like this, I feed them like this, I entertain them like this, I give them leave like this, I do retraining of these people like this to maintain their standards, which is why my price is what it is. Okay? And if an owner from his side says, fine, I am willing to give him a 10% premium for all these reasons, all right, then you start finding a change.
Only cater to the top level. What about all the rest?
It will cascade down. It will cascade down. Standards of living cascade down very quickly.
Right? So, the other things don't change, right? I'm still desperate for a job, and therefore I underprice so dramatically that I'm left with nothing but giving you poor quality work.
In the kind of build-out that India is embarking on, unless the owners and the financiers discipline themselves as much as they expect the contractors to discipline themselves, you will not have a solution. It's got to be all the stakeholders operating in tandem. It is not going to be one of the stakeholders who can make a difference. It's not going to be. The only stakeholder who can make a total difference is the owner ultimately. If a Reliance industry stands up and says, I will build my refinery to this standard, I will maintain these safety statistics, I will make sure that sanitation is there where the workers are housed, and he has these demands, he can drive it. Left to a contractor, yes, it will go down to any which way that he can handle it. You look at your DMRC contractors that are running around, it's a great job being done, okay, no truck over there, but you look at those poor workers who all they have really, which is of any relevance, is that reflective jacket. You see them walking around in slippers. I go to work out in Lodi Gardens, I see them crossing there after work in the evening. There's no safety helmets really, there's no real safety training, okay. So, I mean, there's got to be more than lip service. And that can only be driven by the owner of the project who says, I will get my project, it will be delivered safely, it will be delivered with a set of values that I stand for.
Well, it can be through policies, right? Which
But
are
the
enforceable.
policies have to be implemented.
Yeah.
To our panelists, thank you very much to you in the audience for listening and for participating. You made my job very easy, and I'm very grateful. And I've also been asked to announce that there's a reception at the Shah Jahan Hall immediately after this panel. Thank you all very much.